call this meeting to order. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I believe we have a quorum today. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so we don't need an alternate. Okay, so I'd like to start the meeting very briefly with an indigenous reading, because this is the Conservation Commission, and it just kind of reminds us and grounds us of why we're here, the work that we're doing, and to pay all the respect we can to the people who came before us. So this is part of a speech by Chief Seattle in 1854, for whom the city of Seattle is named, and he agreed to a request from the Great Father in Washington at that time, who happened to be New Hampshire's own Franklin Pierce. The government wanted to buy land in the northwest part of Washington, where the current city of Seattle is, because they wanted a regional capital. They named it after him. So this is part to the local governor. How do you buy or sell the sky, the warmth of the land? The idea is strange to us. If we do not own the freshness and the sparkle of the water, how can you buy them? Every part of this earth is sacred to my people. Shining pine needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every clearing and humming insect is holy in the memory and of my people. The sap which courses through the trees carries the memories of the red man. And there's much more, which I'll read in other meetings, but I want to point out that this speech by him was really one of the spark plugs for the 1960s environmental movement, because a lot of what he talks about is respect for the land, knowledge of the ecosystem, and understanding that all living things are connected. And that was kind of like the starting point for this. So with that, let's have a roll call.
I'm Todd Selig, the administrator.
Linda Kuhn, a representative from the Parks and Rec Committee.
Rachel Gozowski from Parks and Recreation.
Veronique Stewart, Chief Coordinator.
Em Friedrichs from the Town Council.
Sarah Callahan, alternate.
Carolyn Singer, Historic Commission, Heritage Commission.
Gail Carey, Member at Large.
And Neil Slepian, Conservation Commission. And we're supposed to have Ann Welsh and Ted Howard on Zoom. So Craig.
Ted just joined us, and Ann is not here yet.
Okay, great. Hi, Ted. Okay, I just want to make two more quick announcements. One is to welcome Linda Kuhn, who graciously is filling the role that's to resign. And the other thing I want to say is we're going to hold off indefinitely on changing the meeting day to in the month, or the fourth Monday, as I had requested, because Craig does not have any DCAT coverage or Zoom coverage for that. Keep it at the current time and day, if everybody's okay with that. So.
Was it the fourth Monday or the fourth day?
Well, I wanted to change it to the fourth Monday, because that's the day of the Conservation Commission meeting, which happens at night. But it doesn't work for DCAT, so we're going to hold off until that gets resolved by Craig, and so we'll still keep meeting the second Wednesday of the month at 8:30 this time here. The other person that I want to introduce you to is Elliot Ung in the back, who has applied for and will likely the position. And Elliot is a student at the University of New Hampshire. He's a master's student in 2 disciplines. He comes on to join us, but he's been a very crucial volunteer to a lot of the efforts that Veronique has been working on in the past several months. So thank you, Elliot, for all your help, and we're looking forward to welcoming you. So, okay, with that, on to comments on the August meeting notes, which were not considered minutes because we didn't have a quorum. So if everybody's had a chance to read through that, or even if you haven't, if anybody would like to say anything about that, the only comment I have is that Marty put Wagon Hill Farm as the venue, which it wasn't. That was the previous meeting.
other rather than an alternate. I don't know if that means anything. Harry can open them up.
Okay. If they weren't minutes, then I guess we don't need to vote on that. Is that correct? Okay. All right, so let's move on to
I have a question.
Yeah.
Since Marty is not here
Yeah,
today, who
Yeah,
is
oh,
taking?
Gail
I'm
has
Marty today.
Okay.
Gail's
All right.
taking notes
I just
today.
wondered.
Good point. I should have mentioned that. Okay,
And
so
can I just ask a clarification
Sure.
of this? Item 2 is that the meeting will be changed from the current second Wednesday of the month to the fourth Wednesday of the month.
that was incorrect
But,
as
so
well.
that should be a fourth Monday of the
Yes,
correct?
yeah,
Okay.
good catch.
All right,
Thank you.
that, I guess that's how I was confused.
Right.
Was reading through the
Right,
minutes.
okay.
All right. Great. Anybody else before we? No? Okay. Okay, Em, please go ahead. Em's going to present some graphic sign concepts.
All right, screen up. I think I'm plugged in. I don't know if,
Is that all the way in the input?
yep.
Because it's not showing here. Maybe pop it back out and put it back in.
Nothing here. That's the only port options.
No, Sarah,
No.
it's not underneath the table.
I know,
Thank you.
It's like God is talking.
Really?
I know. Craig is very, I understand. Do you have another cable? Do you have like a, you could use one of these over here maybe and switch up your.
No, the only option is this one.
Is a property that has like something really specific to it.
I could open it on the computer.
I'm going to bring you up another connector. You have a USB-C?
I have a, no, it's the, I forget what it's called. The, it's like the small rectangular one,
Computer, Craig.
but it's old. MDP 1.4.
So I think.
I'm going to bring you up another.
Okay.
Yeah, because there's no use, there's just
Yeah.
like, there's a USB on there.
No, that usually doesn't work for visuals. Yeah. All right. That's right. Thank you. Hi.
So let's give that a try.
All right.
And this is why DCAT covered this in court. Thank you.
No.
It's, my
My
guess
computer
is,
then.
we have to boot.
Just restart the computer, you're thinking?
Yeah. Give it a shot.
When in doubt, it's always the best one, right? Just turn it off. The best tech fix that's known.
I wonder if in 100 years people will still be turn off, turn off.
While I try and sort this, just to be mindful of people's time, is there anything else brief that we could use for like many
Yeah.
committee updates or anything like that?
Yeah, well, we can move on to the next topic now, and then we can come back to you once you get it all. So, let's move on to town property list. Now, at our last meeting, we started, and the purpose of this, go through what had already been talked about to confirm what's allowed and not allowed on the properties, and then we're going to move to what, the highlights or the amenities, and the whole purpose of this ties into what Emma's going to show us, because the project is to up all the signage on all the town properties. Number one, for the graphics and the icons to be consistent, and to make sure that we all agree on what's allowed and what's not allowed, and attracting people to what the highlights and to the amenities are. And then the follow-up project to make sure that there are kiosks at all properties, and that's kind of the third step to this. So at our last track, and we only got through Doe Farm and Jackson's Landing, if you have your, and I should have actually printed out or written up notes from that in terms to update this document, which I'll do from this time forward. So we had gotten through Doe Farm, and we agreed on what's allowed and not allowed. We had gotten through Jackson's Landing, and we agreed that taking off bike allowed because it wasn't necessary, because people don't bike around Jackson's Landing. So we got up to Long Marsh Preserve. Does everybody have a copy of it or an access to it? Okay, good. So I'm just going to narrate here. So what we agreed was that dogs on leash are allowed, biking on trails, except for the Sweet Trail. Forward with that? Yeah, I mean, just a show of hands is fine because we don't need to really vote on it. So if everybody as it is, then we'll just show of hands. Okay, everybody all right? Okay.
I have a question, like what is the ultimate of this? Like, I mean, so for example, like the dogs on leash rules, like that, it says that the rules are different on different properties, but reality is it really isn't. So I'm not sure why it's there. Is it so that we can create signage?
Exactly.
And if so, like what kind of signage? So for example, right, there's no hunting on Long Marsh Preserve, but like I've said before, all the other conserved properties completely surrounding Long Marsh allow hunting. And so it's posting it and saying no hunting. It's about posting it and creating signage that says hunting is allowed in the vast hunting on town land, but be aware that hunting is allowed on all the adjacent conserved lands. Wear your orange during hunting. So
Yeah, that's a good point.
So it depends on like what the goal is, and I just don't see where the rules are. I don't see itemizing the dogs for property because it's really not as our ordinances and currently stand. Dogs are only allowed if unleashed, with one exception, and that is Wagon Hill Farm between certain hours of the day. And then if you're using them for hunting on Oyster River Forest. And so I feel like it is a common, that isn't a common, I mean, it's kind of both, right? It's like allowed, but as long as your dog is on a leash.
Well, as I said before, the purpose of this is to agree on what's allowed and not allowed so we can create unity and graphic bonds across all the properties. My feeling on your comment, which is well taken, is that if we allow dogs on, if it's a group that we allow dogs on leash on all properties, and that's common to all properties, I still believe that we should put it on each individual sign because people who visit the properties aren't necessarily going to all the other properties, and there would be no central point where they could say what's always allowed on our land. So I think even things like that, which may seem redundant, I think need to be on each sign.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, the way I would frame this is here are the rules, and then under each property say, here is an exception to our general rules, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Doe Farm, there really is no exceptions to any of the general rules.
Mm-hmm.
So just say that, no exceptions. Whereas like
Okay.
Wagon Hill, there is an exception to the general rule. Maybe I would frame it rather than us each going through like each one of these properties and going through different when ultimately we know that there's only a couple exceptions.
Yeah, and I think the point about what you just said, and then we'll move on, is that, but people who visit the properties don't know. So I think we really need to make it plain and obvious to people who may just go out one time out to Long Marsh or one time out to Doe Farm. So was I going to conclude with, I like your idea though of if there's to make that noted on the sign and particularly during hunting season to wear orange. I think that's a great idea. Is everybody in agreement that we should include that?
I'm just curious about M's presentation because
Yeah.
the signage M has created may address this. you
Okay,
know?
yeah, but I want to finish up with this one particular property, but please, M, go ahead.
Are we ready or?
Yeah,
Okay. Kind of address everyone's concerns. So if we were to take this as a sample of, maybe easier. Sorry, this is to get used to a different trackpad here. So just to, okay. Remotes, this is what things currently look like on the ground. Slightly different perhaps between different trails, but we have a map, and then we do have some of these, see if I can really zoom in here. So we have some icons of permitted uses, and then a list of prohibited uses, and some friendly reminders. So that's, and then, this is from Stephen Woods, so there's some other information on that kiosk. And then, this is the kiosk structure here. And then online, we also use the icon, their place, which is this handout that Neil brought for us last time, I believe. So this is was developed to leave at the library and Parks and Rec and things like that. And it again makes use of some limited icons there for each property. And so what I was thinking is a possible way to kind of combine what we've discussed thus far is two sections for the icon. So if this is the kiosk design, we have space for the map still. I kind of threw in some other things that had come up in discussion, which I'll address in a minute. But to Sarah's point, if we have a section of unique features of each property, we can highlight what is different. And that can include both kind of changes to the regular, as well as it could also include features of the property. So we could combine, this could say hunting permitted as well, and and highlight that in a bright orange banner. Or it could say dogs, off leash between such and such hours. And I think the one strength of this is that, as we discussed, people's ability to pay attention to multiple items greatly decreases the larger the numbers get. So most people can actually absorb between 5 to 9 bits of information at a time, and that information. So when you memorize a phone number, or a social security number, or a zip code, right? You can chunk pretty comfortably. Some people can do 7 or 9, but the more you can chunk information, it's much easier to remember three-digit numbers than 1 9. And so if we split them out kind of between the normal regulations versus the unique, that is easier for people to process. So I tried to pull some examples of different icons that we had discussed and what that might highlight. So farm, we have water access we talked about, swim at your own risk. We talked a little bit about how to think of trails that enable cross-country skiing, trails that are perhaps easier to bike on. I thought, there might be an icon that could kind of summarize that about trails being wider and smoother. So any sort of, maybe adaptive wheelchair use. I think I don't want to go too far into the detail, but there may be buying some of that information. I also thought it was kind of interesting historically because those tend to be carriage trails, so there might be a way to kind of tie that information together. We talked about bird watching or nature, historic landmarks, picnic tables. So one thought might be to group the icons that are unique about each property in one section, and then the ones that are the same would be in a separate section, maybe set out in a different color. And that also, people tend to, once you've read something once, if you see the same information, you tend to skip that. And so by separating this, in a kind of a second location, less interesting color, that also kind of helps the user to understand, recognize this square section in the same color. I know it's the general regulations, that's the same for all town land, so if I've read it once, I know information is there, my memory, right? But that's a way to kind of separate and break down the information so it's more memorable. And we might, to combine this, might include, I think no alcohol was mentioned initially at Mill Pond Park. I don't know if that's needs to be there. It could carry in, carry out. Dogs, dog policy, dog leash to remove wastes. Bike seal to pedestrians. E-bikes must be pedal assist. So trying to, again, group related content so it's less pieces of information. Open daily dawn to dusk for off-highway recreational vehicles. I had noticed in some of the old materials it included no smoking, as well as I think it would group that in with no camping, no fires. No metal detecting, trail building, or disturbing ecosystems. It kind of combines that language there. And no hunting except in designated areas. And that kind of also primes people to be aware that there may be some designated areas in town lands where hunting is permitted that we should, be on the lookout for. So that's just sort of a general thought, I guess, about if we pull out the general regulations in one section and then have unique features in another, that might group information in a useful way. And I did throw together kind of, icons or things you would want to feature and what that might look like, which we could detail if people wanted to. Perhaps it makes sense to do that as we're going through properties or not, but maybe I want the floor a little bit and see if people have comments on the general concept of this idea of separating out unique features and the general.
So I think that's a good concept. The only thing I'm concerned about is that metal detecting and digging. It's those two things. It's important to include digging.
Okay.
That's most important at Wagon Hill Farm. Not so much maybe the other site. It's a problem at Wagon Hill Farm. So maybe on just Wagon Hill Farm signage that would be pulled out.
I actually, I agree that clumping to me is not, it's trying to just into one, but otherwise I like the concept of having those unique features and then actually rising so you have less icons and less things for people to look at. As a concept, I think it's right on. I have other comments about this that are a little bit more detailed, but it also feels like maybe some of it in like a smaller subcommittee of just a few people who are really interested and then really come forward with like a concrete plan. But that, and concept. But I don't know how other people feel.
I would agree with that. I like the idea.
Excuse me, Neil, and Ted has a question.
Okay, Ted, go ahead.
I was going to weigh in, echo what Ann just, the general approach is very good. I like the idea. The unique stuff being standing out and the common stuff being, looks good. I struggle a little bit with the icons, but as you've, but yeah, it's a good way to go.
I do think it would be important, in our previous materials, like in this sheet, for example, the icons here, it does list what they represent over to the right, but it's not immediately clear, what they are, and I think that having a label next to each icon is still useful, so that people can immediately identify. They're not necessarily universal. So I think it makes sense on the signage to have a word or a phrase next to each icon too, so that, you know.
Yeah, I think common practice, that's what the Forest Society does, and I think that is the current recommended best practice with signage.
Yeah. But I did notice, you know, in our existing materials, we did not do that. For example, like this lists amenities for Wiswall Dam, the informational kiosk, access to the Lamprey River. I'm guessing that's the kiosk. Binoculars are probably bird watching. This might be a hiker, picnic table, fishing, and a fish run. But, right. So that would be something to kind of look at as we think about how the kiosks connect to information online.
Right.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Veronique?
And then I think we also need to separately do some work on the map, so remapped, or, you know, see some trails are not on maps. Also, there were things that came out, I think I sent it to everybody, the accessibility study. It was just on 4 things in general for me that we should include on the signs, you know, like ease of the trail, it kind of connects to like that little icon you put there with the wagon. We need to, like, you know, is there steep slopes or things like that, and lengths of all the trails. But I think the map, I like your idea of the sign, I think, but the map part we need to rework to, like, you know, I think there's maybe going to be things that are relevant on, you know, using the old map with the, but I like the concept as far as the icons. I think it's really good, and like we said before, positive, and then kind of the rules, you know, so I think that's really positive engagement for people.
Yeah, I mean, and as after you met with Enoch and spoke with him, that accessibility component, like, I would not have it in that icon at all. That the idea is that it would have to, first of all, like, in order for the town to really put something in there, like, for example, I would want one of those accessibility or some sort of actual kind of study done, and maybe it's Veronique that goes out there and there's some discussion other than throwing up an icon, because
Oh yeah,
you know,
no, I mean,
and typically, like, if they want there to be a description of those trails, that's what accessibility is looking for. And so I get that you're trying to let people understand in general, like, is it going to be a wide, easy hiking trail, or and so I think the common practice for that is, like, really creating these categories of, like, easy, moderate, and difficult trails, rather than having it the way you have it. That's why,
Right.
but I think, like, a lot of this should be something that's out really maybe in a smaller subgroup. That's what I would say, rather than having discussions here and then forward to the whole group. But,
Yeah, Kel, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like what you've done. And if we could go back to your prototype there for Doe Farm.
Yes.
And I like how you've chunked things out.
yeah.
I'm wondering if the information that's in the tan box on the bottom, that was common to all townlands. You know, as you said, people are going to be seeing that over and over and over. Because it's below the unique feed, you could see people over time quickly saying, oh, I know that. And I'm just wondering if maybe those two positions should be flipped so that they're seeing general regulations first, and then they scan down to the unique. And that way, at least they're not skipping over, it's facing them first each time. So just a thought.
I would recommend against that, just because people will, as soon as they recognize that information is the same, they will skip over it. And so where some information is going to be really crucial, such as, hunting information, or even the dogs off leash information, or things like, that should really come up front first, so that people really notice the differences there. Some people are very afraid of dogs or things like that. They really need to, and the general regulations are posted there. We hope that people read the whole sign, but realistically, a lot of people don't, and so it is important to have yours first. Otherwise, we just kind of, people are more likely to miss out on everything if we list the general regulations first.
On everything, meaning?
Meaning,
this-
as soon as they realize it's repeated information, they stop looking.
Oh, so that they wouldn't go below,
They wouldn't
is
get
what you're
as far
saying. I
as
see.
unique features.
Okay, my comments are that number one, I think this is a really terrific idea, and I think it just simplifies the discussion that we started to have, because we could just take everything which is allowed, apply it to each one, which I think is the direction you were going in, Sarah, and then we don't have to go over that again. All we have to do is then go through what's not allowed on each individual property and what the highlights are and the unique features. So I think that can cut our time. I think it's a great idea, and particularly when you pointed out, which I personally hadn't even thought of, about connecting these icons to all the printed material. That's have the icons. I was just thinking of the signage, but to have the icons be consistent all the way through, all the printed online material as well, is just like beautiful. And then the third thing was Sarah's idea to have a subgroup, which we had kind of talked about before. So before we close the meeting today, it would be great if we can put together a subgroup to keep this moving forward outside, and then potentially to to have another presentation. Okay, this is where we've landed. So I guess I would ask for anybody who wants here to be a subgroup member. You had said that you were probably not going to be too available because of all your other commitments, but you've done a beautiful job of this first step. So I guess, Em, what I'd ask you, and not to put you on the spot, you can answer later if you want, would be, would you devote some time to working on this with a subgroup outside of this, or are you totally not of it? And again, I don't want to put you on the spot in front of everybody, but it's, you've done such a great job. I think it would be kind of a shame to lose your talent and your creativity.
Thank you. I have to, I could try and participate. I can't promise at this point on Mondays, so that's kind of my limitation. So
Okay.
maybe if there's enough space without getting to a quorum, be there as a possible or an alternate.
Okay, we're available to consult with, basically. Okay.
But I was wondering, Veronique, is there plans still to try and work with UNH students at all on the design of some of these materials, or have you heard anything back?
I haven't.
Okay.
I haven't yet. Yeah. So I would hope that would be really helpful. If we could work with them, but I haven't heard anything back.
Because I imagine also, how much work the subcommittee has to do may depend a little bit on that, the response from UNH, because whether, students who are studying this topic can put together proposals versus, is the town working with a professional graphic designer on this, that might require slightly different amounts of input, I guess, from the subcommittee.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So anyway, if people don't really want to make it, they can reach out to everybody separately and see if you'd like to join the subcommittee, because this is an important thing for us to accomplish as a committee, and we are going to need some help on this. So please think about it, and if you're willing, raise your hand. If not, I'll probably read you.
Depends on how much time's.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, that depends. I've been on subcommittees, and the amount of time you devote to it is up to of the working group, I guess you'd say. Okay. So Carolyn, thank you. Anybody else want to jump in right now? Gail, yay! You get a gold star. Elliot, do you think you would have some time to commit? Because, your perceptions, as I think, are very relevant.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so that's a good working group. So we have 3 and then the consultant on call. Does that work for you?
Sure.
Okay, great. Okay, do you have anything else that you want to present right now?
Sure. So I guess in the mock-up, some things that came up based on the discussions that maybe would be useful to kind of prime people for now. One of the things that whether we sometimes have some need to include additional information. I think there was some mention of the 7 rivers to the coast. I'm not sure if we're meant to that because of funding that we've received in the past, or if that's more just like an additional FYI. But I tried to throw in some examples of additional information that might end up on the signage, so we could start to think about how that might get communicated. And this is where I think a professional, graphic designer would this information in a much nicer way. But that's kind of one thing that we may be thinking about. We'd also had a conversation with Neil on Monday that we might consider, certainly at Wagon Hill this would be happening, but we might want to consider a QR code for donation purposes, and that could go directly to one of the land stewardship funds, the trust, if people wanted to donate. So we might consider if that would be included somewhere. And then we might also want to consider a separate QR, encouraging folks to open the trail reporting page before they take off. So the idea of that is that if the general public is aware of the trail reporting page that trail stewards tend to use, then anyone can help report issues. But it's important prepped and open before you get out, because one of the things it does ask for is for your GPS pinpoint in the moment. You wait till you get back to the kiosk to report an issue, it's not as helpful. So kind of priming users, oh, hey, before you, would you have this page open on your phone if you're out there with your phone. So those are kind of some of the other things that came up in discussion and how fit into, I guess, this picture. And then to just give some, I guess some as, I think I threw together, yeah, these were just some of the other uses that came up in our discussion that maybe I wanted to make sure that people kind of felt like all of these features or uses could fit in somehow appropriately. So the picture of a cross-country skier, and then no footprints or dogs in ski tracks, because that comes up a lot at Spruce Hole Bog. Playground feature, seasonal rink, living shoreline project. This was at the Wiswall Dam. I did look at the existing rules and regulations and pulled items from that, so if that's important, how we would communicate information like that. Sled at your own at Wagon Hill, similar to swim at your own risk. Community gardens feature, interpretive trail. I wasn't sure if the interpret meant for children or a general audience, so there's a kind of way to communicate that either direction. A hunt permitted in some areas. Would we want to show people a map for that? So, for example, at Spruce Hole Bog, maybe then this map is altered, and this part is in orange, and then there's it clarifies key that that's where hunting is allowed or something like that. But thinking about how to express that, and then to Sarah's point, be safe and wear blaze orange in season, and how that's a little tricky because seasons vary slightly depending on what you're hunting. So how do we express that? Do we say generally September through December? What kind of wording should go there? And then, it could be a slightly different, not the blaze orange, but maybe the hunting permitted on adjacent land for the trail. And then we had a tidal boat ramp at Jackson's Landing, because that was a concern. It's a boat ramp, but it's only tidal, so how do we express that? For the places where fishing is allowed, Wiswall Dam and I'd heard some complaints from people that sometimes line and hooks are left in the river. So could we combine that to hooks to protect swimmers and wildlife? The dogs off leash, maybe clarify that dogs who are off leash are expected to be dogs that do not jump or bite, because there's been some concerns with that at Wagon Hill. Water view without water access. That might be something to fit in. Bathroom facilities, something else you want to mention. There's porta potties or an actual, physical bathroom, alternate icons for that. And then we discussed a little bit limited parking kind of options. We might have, no parking, street parking, for example, at a Nature Conservancy or at the Oyster River Park, the little park on Oyster River. And then just for the online version, because I think we discussed if something is totally undeveloped, there would not be a kiosk, but we could still on like the Pike property to say, no trails or something like that, just to have that cohesiveness. So those were kind of I just did some playing with different ideas and concepts that we had discussed to see how it all might. So I don't know if people have questions about that or thoughts or any concerns about, discussions we had that they're not sure how this might fit into the system.
Oh, I have a comment that I think that all the things that you just showed are really comprehensive and seem to be either the highlights of the amenities or the special concerns, not what would be permitted on or not permitted on all the properties. So I think you've given the working group a lot to choose from and to work with. I think that you've done a really wonderful job, outstanding job.
Yeah, and I think then the working group will have to decide what's the most important to be out there, because I can see a lot of icons or signs that could be, used, but there's properties where we have too many icons. So I think it's going to have to be a matter of priority and what do we really think is important for people to know. And once again, we want to make new signs, properties, but we want to also update the website. So maybe on the website there's more icons, on the page, but for the public signs at the physical property, we have to be really careful about not overwhelming, like you said, with icons. The other comment I wanted to make about the 7 Rivers to the Coast, well, it's 7 Rivers to the Coast is in the process of actually printing signs for most of the that are part of the have access on the water, and so they are making separate signs. Michael Berendt and person from the working group talking about the size of the signs, and I think we talked about it either at the last year, I believe, which was what size we wanted the signs to be, and and we agreed we wanted the signs to be included somewhere on the key instead of having like a separate post and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I think that part is going to be covered already.
Okay. So that would look like, maybe for everyone's reference, so that might look kind of like this, where there might be an additional sign like this brown one here. That's about
right.
7 rivers to the coast.
Correct.
Okay. Do you think that because people aren't going to know what 7 Rivers to the Coast is? Hold on, let me just finish and then I'll go to you. Would a little QR code next to that, if anybody's interested, make sense? I guess something for the working group to talk about.
Well, I think the 7 Rivers to the Coast sign has a QR code.
Oh,
it's
okay.
part of
it has it included already.
Yes, okay. And different signs for different rivers. So basically, there'll be a sign matching which river we're on at the property. So.
Okay, good. Sarah?
Yeah, I like this idea of having like a little icon for each of those different kind of unique features. I think that's really great. I think like overall, the couple things that trying to combine all these into one big sign, which is, will wrap my brain around that at all. And so you've done like a good job of doing that. But I do wonder if that is doing. So it sounds like you're trying to kind of combine use with etiquette. And I don't know online, but the Conservation Commission maybe a few years ago did create like a trails and public lands etiquette. And it was based on something similar that was done in Vermont. But there was also, Leave No Trace is another organization that deals with kind of trail etiquette. And they kind of have their own consistent signage with icons, kind of interesting to take a look at. The other benefit of kind of compartmentalizing the map separate from the uses as different signs is that if at some time those uses change or the trails change because you add trails and you have to update the map or you discontinue trails, that you're only replacing a component of that on the kiosk rather than having to replace this entire unit. And then the other thing is as far as like the 7 rivers to the coast, there are certain times where the town is required to post because say they got LCHIP money, like for Oyster River Forest, and they provide you the sign that you have to put on your kiosk because you received funding from them. So I would say that kind of information where there was like some sort of financial requirement. In this case, it was like the list of the donors who contributed to protecting that property. Those are kind of like a separate entity or unit rather than trying to combine it all onto that one page. And, different, right, you've got, and I know you get all these little signs because it's like, well, Oyster River Forest is part of the Polynesian Pathways or the Monarch Way Station. And so the Monarch Way Station sends you their official sign that you then post on the property. But it means that you don't have to update that every time something changes or a policy changes, so.
And does anybody want to comment on that?
I have something else when that's done.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Oh, okay. So I want to make 2 points and then I'm going to that. I really think it's important to do a mock-up of the ultimate design you choose and station somebody, X number of feet away and ask people what they read. And, I think you really have to do that before there's a significant illness. That's my preference.
So like a focus group.
No, a tough trial.
No,
A trial.
You put a paper poster out there, one of us sit there
Yeah.
and take notes or ask people, what did you read?
Exactly.
What did you get from this?
That's an excellent
yes.
idea.
That's great.
Did you read it?
Yeah.
I think we really, I just think that has to really be done. The other thing is, as the representative for history here, I just want to make sure that, the historical components of each site is somehow recognized. I will say that, the Heritage Commission, we're really focused on Wagon Hill, right? Once that's done, we'll still be focused on Wagon Hill, but, there'll be more opportunity to develop some of the historical resources that are on other, trails. I want to also point out that with Wagon Hill Farm, we're putting in an ADA fairly soon. That has triggered a sort of a landscape design on the exterior. So there's going to be some to how that's laid out. So I just want to make sure that maybe the sign at Wagon Hill Farm, the permanent sign, is better coordinated with what's going on at Wagon Hill Farm, because what we're doing at Wagon Hill Farm is still in progress. They're still quite fluid.
Well, that's why it's good that you're on the working group.
Yeah.
Well, that's
So you
it,
can
yes,
make
but
sure that's
I want
included.
to, it's, it takes time. And so I just want to make sure, though, that you know, historical resources on each trail are in fact part of this, and that with Wagon Hill Farm, you just recognize that, you know, changes are coming to the exterior. Exterior landscape immediately around the house is how I probably, I don't want people to think, you know, we're going over, but immediately around.
Okay, good. Thanks for that information. Very good. Yes.
Is there a professional recommendation as to the size of signage that would be more, encourage people more to look at it, the size of what you post?
I'm sure there is. I don't know what it is offhand. I'm not a graphic designer. But I imagine whoever we work with to produce these would have suggestions, and we can probably rely also on a little bit on to Sarah's point, you know, these are all, you know, working with a graphic size with the idea that you can see them from a certain distance, and then you're drawn in to read more closely, and that you can also still then read all the information without having to get incredibly close. And I think absolutely I share with Sarah that I envisioned kind of the mapped own piece of the sign, not all printed on one, but you know, these pieces next to each other. So having one with the features and the general rules, and then the map, and then, you know, whatever additional signage might be required based on funding, whether that be the donors or the Seven Rivers to the Coast. And then I think there's also an opportunity there for the Historic Commission down the road to perhaps develop historic specific plaques that could get asked.
That's what I was wondering, based on size-wise, if you're gonna have, like, say, a little separate plaque for Seven Rivers, then you have you have an ADA plaque, as hopefully more and more of these trails become ADA accessible. So you would have those little things, but to changed or taken down if not applicable, or whatever. But as long as there's space for those little ones, and then you have your map, which things change there, you would just change out the map, not the whole uses and exceptions and standard rules.
Yeah.
I know, it's about finding that balance. Like, have you ever been up to like the Whites and you like go take a look at one of their kiosks? There's like signs over signs over signs, and you take a look at that and you're like, all right, there's my trail map. I'm going, right? Like,
You're right,
it's over. It's like, be careful of the bears, and like, you know, and other stuff about etiquette, but safety, but as well as etiquette. And then sometimes you end up losing it, right? Like,
Yeah, that's good.
It's like and so that's what I was saying. I'm haven't settled out yet, like etiquette with the use, which is what you've done, whether that is a better approach than get out. Because I think if you separate it out, you can be more general and obvious and clear about what trail etiquette is. Then you don't want to overwhelm the sign either.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting concept, that's all.
That's a good point. Go ahead. Oh, did Ted or Ann, do you want to jump in on this at all?
Well, oops. I mean, I agree mostly with what's been said. I think that it's a good idea to have them separate. It's a good idea. I thought the more things you put on the sign, the less likely people are to read it. So I do think that there's a real sort of clarity and specifics, you know, and then getting it small enough so people will read it, or, you know, small enough in terms of numbers. So I think the subcommittee is just going to have to decide what is the most important thing that they're looking for.
Right. To distinguish, as Sarah pointed out, between rules and etiquette. Those are two separate things. And Sarah, that's very good of you to point that out. And Anna, I want to thank you for joining us from the International Space Station.
Yeah, you know, I didn't put this on. And honestly, I don't know how to take it off.
You just have to ask your grandkids.
You're good, because at least you're not in the position of the attorney who went before the judge and had the cat face.
Cat face. Yes.
That's pretty good. Thank you.
So,
Rachel, do you think that this is going to work for the park
Yeah.
part of the discussion?
Yeah, I do. I think it's laid out well. Just one thing that comes to mind, and I know it's on there as a concept, and I think those are really important. Sometimes you get to that kiosk at a trailhead and you do review it, but then once you get on the trip, be like, wait, what was that, or what trail? So I think having some sort of resource to be able to capture what's highlighted at the kiosk to then be able to move on to the trail and have that resource or access to make decisions while you're out there or remind yourself of certain things would be a great component to make sure that's included on there.
one more thing before I
Okay,
go.
Carolyn.
I got to say, I'm going to focus on users. My husband goes hiking in the UK all the time, and he buys these ordnance maps, and he plots everything out. So, the question is, you're probably going to have novices along with trail users. So I'm just wondering how that enters into the discussion here, because, you have to focus on etiquette so much for the, people who do it all the time. You probably have to do for the novices. So I guess I would focus more on who your audience is, or at least talk about that more.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a good point. And again, something that I think is going to come out in the working group too. So yeah, very good thing to bring up. Okay.
And also, the TNC is updating their signs for Sweet Trail at Lumberland. I think it's going to be put up next week. Good example, they had a whole new sign redesign. Would be interested to see how it's laid out, because they had old signs there. While I like the concept of having different signs for like the map and the other the newer signs that I've seen around, like Forest Society or Audubon, they have everything on one big sign that fills most of the kiosk. So I'm not saying that's good or bad, that's just like something to consider too, is what everybody else is doing recently with updating their signs. And I'm sure once again it goes back to somebody, graphic design, giving us advice about all that. I agree the maps would change, can change over time. The goal would be to have up-to-date maps when we redo the signs. Then, kind of think how often are we going to change the map? I don't know. That's just I can see both sides. I just don't know if we have like all these different sizes on kiosk. Like now we're gonna have a little history there and a little that there. What are people gonna pay attention to? So I guess it comes back to like the mock-up, like Carol said, which is a really good idea to put something on a poster and maybe to try different posters, over a couple times to see what people get from one display versus another. I think that could be an option. Just being out there.
It would be so much fun for a UNH class then, because you could have different students' designs featured at different, land.
Yes.
And then responses of what they paid attention to and kind of judge them in a real environment.
Okay.
I think so I'm not a graphic designer, but I have worked quite a bit in communications, and part of that has been structuring. And so I do think, to Veronique's point, what we do want is a kind of a top category at every location. And you might have multiple signs, one might go into specifically historic information. But if we have every property, lost it here, but if every property, sort of this part of the sign is what people know, that it's consistent, it's, the largest labels, and everybody knows that this is what they should be looking at every property. So it's top, usually on the left, that's where we begin when we're reading, right? In the information hierarchy, there's 5 to 7 bits, or sorry, 5 to 9 bits of information here. And whatever that information is, there might be opportunities to go more into elsewhere on the sign, but that should be like, this is what everybody looks at when they get there. So people know, to your point, you know, it's not like the White Mountains where you have a billion different signs. And I think that's kind of the downside of if you have a hunting sign that's separate from the main piece of information, then you start to kind of lose what you're supposed to be looking at. So the sense that this is the information that everybody should be reading on every property. And I think that, you know, that should highlight, and that the reason to perhaps combine their rules with features or etiquette is whatever those 5 to 9 things for that property, that's what should be there. And maybe depending on the property, that includes some things that are etiquette like, you know, no metal, you know, please stay out of cross-country ski tracks. And other times it may include things that are more feature-like. Might say, you know, the tidal boat ramp, or it might say something about historic landmarks. So, but to think of that as the top piece of information that people would be looking at.
And that would change for each property, you're saying? Be
Right.
specific to each property.
Right,
Yeah,
so that
that's
the
great.
goal would be
Yeah.
5 to 9 up here. And that's this section, what everyone should read at every property. And that the idea is that color-wise, font size-wise, location within the kiosk-wise, those are all kind of directed to help people understand that. And the bottom part of that is the part that stays consistent about general regulations.
Okay. So the question now, so since Gail and Carolyn and Elliot are going to be taking this forward, can you get together with Gail and, you know, how to pass the work that you've done so far on to her? And, you know,
Absolutely.
figure that out to,
Yeah.
and then perhaps Gail can schedule a working group committee between now and our next meeting and make a small presentation as to how you're going to take it forward and, you know, what the ideas are.
Okay,
Of the
although I
group.
already know I won't be at the next meeting.
What's that?
I already know I won't be
Oh.
here at the next meeting, but maybe I can talk to
Yeah, Carolyn
Carolyn.
or Elliot.
or Elliot.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Can I just add a couple things? So was that Ann?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ann.
Go ahead, Ann.
I made a comment on what Veronique said about having it all on one map. When I envisioned it as two different parts, I imagined them the same size and put together as if they were all one, not different pictures all over the. So it would look like one large, and it would all be the same on all the properties, the same distance, the same placement, but they could be removed one at a time. And we have had over time, you know, we don't have a lot of money in our budget, right? Anything you can do that allows you to do something smaller and less expensive at a time when you have to change something rather than having to do the other thing, I think is a benefit. But 2 cents.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. So you're saying to make it kind of flexible or interchangeable where things can come off when they're not needed or put on when they are needed?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
the same size, so it looks like one big next to each other, placed next.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. The other thing that I just wanted to say before we close out this part of the, was recently up at Mount Major, and they had a great little, and you were there just the other day, and on the map, they had a little phrase on the bottom that said, "Take a picture of this map."
Yeah.
And I thought, what a great idea. So, I mean, maybe most people would think of that, but I actually, at the time, I thought I had the map in my head, and I took a picture, and it ended up being very helpful.
Yeah.
That's the kind of point that I was making. Once you get on the trail, you want to have that resource to refresh yourself.
And
Or,
the QR code or
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah.
go online, but then some people.
And that speaks to Carolyn's point about the novice.
right.
Yeah,
you know.
right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So this is, I love I actually I like that those unique features are first and in the bottom right-hand corner. And I like that order of having that there and then the consistent uses below that. I like the way you've put the icons and then the words on the right. And then, so we started this conversation about use, right? Like that's where what and what aren't allowed. And then we've kind of expanded it into something a little bit bigger, I think, about general signage. And so, the question I have is like, what is the extent of this project? Because use is one of those, but, then you get, do you include those trail descriptions? Where do you put the mileage on the map? And all these other components of important information that you include that is relevant to any user on a map. And so, what is the purview of the subs? What is the extent of what they're going to be looking at? And do we start wrapping these other conversations and do we put in those descriptions based on Enoch's walks of the property about, the accessibility of some of the trails and other components of signage that we'd like to have on kiosks in general.
Yeah, and I think the point is that we only want to do this project once now. So we just want to make sure that we take our time and do it right without dragging it out. So that's why I think that having the working group to work on it in between meetings, I think is going to be help to keep it moving along. And, those points are really good. And, you should feel free to reach out to anybody on the working group if something comes to mind. Gail can be probably your main contact. And I guess in terms of what the purview of, or what the parameter, the way I saw it right now, or kind of what's going through my mind, is that the first thing is to figure out what are going to be the general uses for all properties. And we've already kind of gone through that. What are restricted for all properties? And we've already gone through that on this document that Ann put together. And basically to clarify those, number one. Number two is to go through the highlights and make, recommendations on that. Number three is to assign icons. And, this is just kind of project management that's kind of going through my head on this. And then the final thing is going to be the mock-up sign creation that Carolyn recommended, which I think is an excellent idea. And that kind of splits out into, do you contact me to see what they're doing and see if they have some good ideas that we can work with? And then also, do we seek help from some of the graphic designer in H? Or is that not really workable because, they work in a semester type of thing? So would that some would be willing to take on outside of as extra credit or whatever? So those are just the things that kind of go through my mind in terms of organizing what the steps might be for the sign part of it. And then for the trail part of it, I think that can be, because we agreed that we're going to separate them out into two, that be handled separately because that may actually take more time. Veronique had brought up that she felt that some of the sign trail maps were not really accurate. And before we go into trail map creation, we just want to make sure that they are accurate. And so that would be, I think, kind of a separate maps versus the uses and icons. So does everybody agree with that kind of process, or does anybody have any ideas that might work better?
Well, I agree with you, Neil, that I think that is kind of a separate project, and whether that happens now or takes, I would imagine it's a larger budget. Someone who's actually a cartographer to do the map. You can't give that to a graphic designer, I don't think. And so a map update would be, I would imagine, would require a little bit larger budget. And I think that that's where you would probably think about adding instances or coding as to, easy, moderate, difficult, because that would be a whole additional project to trail. I think that, working with a graphic designer, they would probably have icons to use, and that could be very helpful. I imagine they would send like a mock example before printing would come to this committee for people to put on, but a graphic designer would want to pull icons that look similar and kind of have a nice aesthetic in terms of matching the style, and the way that they do that, that might slightly affect which, what icon is used for what. So I think that like we don't have to finalize things too perfectly, in terms of that, but we do need to be clear of what information we want included on each sign for a graphic designer to work with, and also which information is most important. That's the information that they would then take to produce a material. What's the most important information, and also what's everything that needs to be included. And then I think the guidelines that we've discussed already about being able to, say, swap out, certain bits of information would be very useful for the kind of create this so that it's arranged in a way that makes it easy to do that.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to really having these as two different units, because if we want these signs, if we want all of our kiosks updated with this consistent usage signage, separate project from mapping, that you're going to want to create those signs and have them posted at all of our kiosks maybe before that other work is done. And I know, I don't know, Veronique, if you have been talking or with Steve at all, Luderman, about updating maps. I do know like there was interns that did a whole lot of GIS mapping, at least of the attributes of, with this idea that yes, ultimately long-term, or not long-term, but at least the idea was hopefully shorter, that all the maps for all the conservation areas would get updated with accurate trails and these different attributes or amenities that are identified on, and that Steve, the GIS specialist, for going to do that mapping work.
Yeah, we talked early this year about it, and you're still in the process, and I'm actually meeting Rich on Friday. It's one of my big topics of conversations. So I would hope that we could get help, support from Steve, who's for the town on the map front. Yeah.
Okay, great.
So I can keep you appraised on that part where I find out more. But I think if we do new signage, even if they're like separate signs, for me, just as a user, I would prefer everything to be put up at the same time. It would kind of be more consistent.
Yeah.
So I'll find out, more about the mapping, but that would be our resources, Steve, from the DPW minister, just for the whole town. So, yeah.
Right.
I think-
Well,
Okay,
and
that's
and
good.
if you did do it separately, you would at least have to have visually an understanding of how those are actually going to fit together
Right.
in the end, a year from now. If
Yes,
those maps don't.
with the graphics
Because
and-
I will
yeah.
tell you, I do not see those maps being updated or completed for at least another year. If I'm honest, like, and maybe they'd be done piecemeal, like you might have a couple done and then a couple more. If this is a project you want to really see get accomplished and out there, like maybe they are mounted as an individual sign on a post right near the entrance, but then as soon as you get to incorporate that map, you move it over to the kiosk and marry those two, right? So, I mean, there's different approaches you could take to making it work. I think that we're a town, we're not a conservation organization that is going to be able to work, because you have three full-time staff who are doing all of this work for you. So it's a slower process, and depending on when we want to see it done, then that will affect what approach we have to take. in order
Yeah,
for that
and
to be-
I think that the modular idea is a really good one. So that's a good approach to allow flexibility in terms of getting everything done. And as Ann pointed out, probably funds are limited, so we probably wouldn't be able to get everything done on everything, at the, prioritize which properties should be first and, go from there. So, yeah, these are all good points. I'd like the discussion so we can get to the land stewardship coordinator update. And then probably take the item number 8, the land stewardship coordinator presentation of accessibility study, and put that onto next month's agenda because we got to be rushed. So is everybody okay with moving on? Okay. So Veronique, please update us.
Okay, so August, we had Durham Farm Day, I think, since this last meeting. We had about 50 engagements. We had a great crew manning the table, volunteers, people from the Conservation Commission, Marty from the subcommittee. Lots of engagement were about invasives, which really highlighted that subject at the town level with the public. And we're actually working more at the Conservation Commission is working on articles in Friday updates and maybe a specific Facebook page for the Conservation Commission /stewardship so that we can do more out where we can. I presented on the trails and conservation properties again at Riverwoods, Durham. That was the same presentation I had done at the library a couple months ago and had over 30 people, lots of interest, questions. So it was a really nice, people seem to be pleased. Sarah and Erin and I, correct me if I forgot somebody, organized the fall Discover Durham Trails walks for this fall. I think we sent the poster to everybody. So there's going to be October 19th will be at the Milne Sanctuary and the Hamilton Peace Chapel. And will be at Thompson Farm with Steve Eisenhower from UNH Woodlands, and he's going to update people on the agroforestry projects there. Really interesting for people to discover a different property, a UNH property on Durham land. BioBlitz, I'm working with 3 UNH capstone students, sustainability class from Erin students. I met them last week, and we're gonna meet every Wednesday. They are gonna we're gonna work for the fall semester, and they're gonna really help develop the promotional, promotion and the organization of the day. I'm gonna have them reach out to contact possible group leaders, and so they're really excited about this, and we are going to the Psychoscience Center BioBlitz on Sunday. We're going to meet Katie, give us a little tour and a lot of information. And so the work continues on that with Anne, Rachel, Hill, on that project. And we will be presenting about it at the library, the public library, December 30. The students will basically present, their work, and they'll present, they'll explain to the public what's a BioBlitz, why are we doing this, etc. To kind of raise awareness. And Haley and Jody will come and explain how to use iNaturalist projects on the second part of that presentation. A lot of full work days planned. October 4th, I posted it on Nature Groupie. We are going to try to remove the old fencing of different materials and old tree stand at the Pike property. They just informed the abutters yesterday, and that's the property can be more some big invasives, and also we can start having the contractor mow the pasture. So this will be October 4th with the Scouts at Longmarsh. I just talked with troop leader yesterday, and we are trying to work every month starting in October. They had kind of like a change in organization and kind of lapse to the wayside, but I finally got in touch yesterday, so we narrowed some dates down. I'm meeting with Rich on Friday to discuss different projects, trying to find out more information about the dam removal. And Anne Lightbody had suggested we could work with some of her capstone students in the spring on the revegetation project. So I want to touch base with Rich first on that. The DES permit for the Oyster River Forest Trail Bridge is being revised, so Mark West has sent a revision. I'm not sure if you will know, the original permit was denied, the stone ford was not allowed by the DES. So Mark has gone back there and we are looking at raising the original bridge and then filling and having another walk a little farther down instead of the stone ford. And hopefully that will be approved. The Stallworthy property will be surveyed this fall. The contract has been signed, and the survey should be completed before the end of the year. So that's great, so we can really know the boundaries there. And
Ernie, can I go back? I have a question about Oyster River Forest.
Yep.
So the bridge that is currently there is designed for vehicle access, for mowing, but also for management of the forest land on the remainder of the property on the other. So is that boardwalk that is going to be
It's going to be the same
installed?
width and
Will it be vehicle?
yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I'm going to start easement monitoring, meeting Mr. Merrick in October. So I'm going to start the easement monitoring this fall, and I'm going to work with some volunteers that I'm hoping to train just to work with me this year. But that would be great to get the support of volunteers, or if anybody on this commission, and I also mentioned it at the Concom, want to come. And I'm working with DIA for the partnership reimbursement of the materials for Longmarsh. And I've been talking with Ellen Snyder from the Newmarket Concom about both of us towns applying for trail analysis, possibly DVD and all that, with them acquiring the Rosa property. We're going to do it this fall, but decided to wait for the spring to see if they get a grant to a Rosa property first. And to do some more, contact private property owners and things like that. And I've been working with Neil and Dwight on the coming budget for this coming year, and that's about it. So still a lot of trail work and good timing to remove visible invasives like burning bush. So been doing a lot of that, and still some small repairs on some trails. We finally used up the pile of lumber at Longmarsh, Sarah. The boards seem to be breaking on there over a week period of time. So we talked with Todd about that the other day, and we definitely need to look a solution for that.
Well, there was
obviously.
some discussion earlier. We could talk about that. I'll show
Yeah.
you.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a bigger project, because otherwise you're replacing boards every year. You're out
Yes,
there
it's
every-
gonna be unending project.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I have.
Okay, and you're talking about the long boardwalk?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Across the marsh. Okay. Anybody else?
Come back to earth, Ann.
Oh, yeah, wow.
Whoever explained it, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so the last thing on our agenda is committee updates, in case anybody wants to update. Do you have anything, Joel, from Parks and Rec that you want to let anybody know about?
No, I would say, we're helping to advertise for the Discover Durham registrations through our website there.
Is that up now?
It is up now. We
Okay.
have Facebook events for each of them, registration, so.
Rachel,
Yes.
you had your study back, right?
Yes.
I wondered if you were going to, give a discussion of that, have a discussion of that with the Land Stewardship Committee. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I can prepare for that for an upcoming meeting. That would be
Okay.
helpful. Trail connectivity was a big key factor on that one, so that would be definitely something to discuss with this group. Veronique has been brought into some of that discussion, but we're trying to kind of organize ourselves around the information that was presented, but trail connectivity was one of the key topics.
So do you want to pass that out to the subcommittee, or how do
Sure.
you want to handle communicating that?
Yeah, we can send the report out.
Or put it somewhere where we can access it on,
Yep.
on the web? Okay, yeah, and just let us know how to get to it. I think that would be great. You know, Ann says it's interesting. I trust her,
Okay.
her opinion on that, so yeah, be great if we could all take a look at it.
Sure.
Let's see.
I have some committee updates.
Yes, ma'am.
Unless someone else we're, I mean to jump the gun, did you have one from Concom? Sorry.
Well, the only thing I have from the Conservation Commission is that Dwight and I presented, the Wetland Shoreland Overlay District proposed ordinance to combine the two ordinances, one for wetland, to the planning board. Initially, it seemed like it went over quite well. Everybody was very enthused with the presentation. And after thinking, there were a lot of really hard questions to it. And so Dwight has endeavored to answer some of that, and I'll be following up as well, because the board has all that they need in order to feel comfortable debating it and moving it forward. When Em and Dwight and I met separately the other day, other ideas on how to move it forward, maybe more expeditiously. So we're going to be looking into that as well. So that's from Concom. Did you have something?
Sure. So from Town Council, I think the big one is that we had a member of the public come forward with some questions about the town's pesticide policy, and had a lot of support from around that. And I think that brought up some interesting questions. I know that DPW, Rick has been working with her to concerns, but in that discussion, I did a little sort of additional research, and Dover, for example, has an organic pesticide policy, or herbicide, I should say, policy. And so DPW does a great of, they really think about how they're managing lands. They try to mow around pollinator plants, we know, right? They try and keep on invasives and controlling those. They're already very invested in this. They, of course, follow best practices when they do apply herbicides. But is there anything else we could be borrowing from neighboring communities about what they're doing and how they manage? So I think that's a fair question. If anything productive comes out of that meeting, I will, and I hear of it, I'll of course share that here, but it may, I don't know whether the land stewardship subcommittee would like to, think about any further, if there's anything there. And then in terms of the wetland shoreland overlay district, because I had been participated in helping to draft that as part of a subcommittee, an earlier version. One of the things that I think would have been touched upon a little bit was the idea about whether we would ask the town to voluntarily commit itself to the wetland shoreland overlay district, and that's something that the town currently does with the historic district. So public property is exempt from all zoning, so that includes town property and that includes UNH property. So as a result, the town is not zoning regulation, and in fact, in many places with our parks, we aren't necessarily doing that. So our current zoning to maintain grass down to the water's edge along tidal waters, for example. But we are able to do that because it is a town. I think the advantages of considering whether we'd like to ask the town to voluntarily submit itself to the ordinance is that it would it's a hard message to ask residents to comply with things that the town is not complying with. It also gives us a good idea of how viable things are. Like if the town is struggling to comply with these ordinances, then it's probably not fair to ask residents and property owners to comply with them. So that's a good kind of gauge of whether it's reasonable. And I think it's also an opportunity to know, I think our current staff and town leadership is very mindful of trying to engage with best environmental, but this would just kind of solidify that into, policy in a sense, that the town, into the future, looking at, the conservation impacts of its buildings and its other land uses. So that might be something that we could consider if there's interest discussing further.
Let me ask you a question on that, Anne, because, you had brought this up before, and I think it's a really powerful idea. The question I have is, when is the right time to make that proposal? I think it would have to be when that WSOD gets to the town council. So whatever permutation of it comes out of the planning board, or if we pursue another method of, would that come at, I guess my question is, would that request come at the same time as the present council on that ordinance?
So if that change is considered a change, I could write to Michael and ask him if that's considered a significant change, then it has to have a public hearing before the planning board and the town council.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's considered an insignificant or a change of minor consequence, then it can happen just at the town council. But either way, it's a conversation that's probably, if the land stewardship subcommittee is helpful to have sooner rather than later, to express that idea earlier on in the process and see how committees may feel about it. I know that Concom has kind of wrapped up their work on this. So that's where I think to bring around to the different committees, because it could potentially affect Parks and Rec, for example, too.
Right, that's true. Yep.
I mean, and I think it does merit a conversation, maybe not, and as you pointed out, not here necessarily, but also when those ordinances are, when they get adopted, anything that's happened before that gets grandfathered in. Like, so if you have currently an agricultural field that goes up to a, like you can continue to manage that as an agricultural field, just like you could continue to manage grassland. It's only moving forward, any new changes is subject to, right? So
Generally speaking, this one
it would be like,
does require like a minimum 25-foot buffer along at least tidal water bodies. So it would affect, have a small impact on some existing use.
So that's really where the question comes in. And then I would agree, like, what properties in town or that we currently hold would this apply to, like understanding which properties those are and how that would impact our use, I think is an interesting question. And I think the ones that I really think of are really more those parks, like Jackson's Landing in particular.
Old Landing Park as well.
Old Landing, right. Milne, potential, right? And so what future uses does the town have or to see happen at those properties? I think it's a good question. And I would agree with you and Neil that I think it would be like really great. I'd really consider this and say, yeah, we're going to follow these ordinances just like everybody else in the community. But we've got to understand that first, moving forward before like endorsing it, I would say. So.
Yep, that's a good point, Sarah. So it's more complex than just either a yes or
yeah,
I guess. Okay, thank you. And anything else, Sam?
And then the kind of a last update, so the Conservation Commission approved $500 out of the general fund to be used for purchasing yellow light bulbs and giving them out to residents. And the benefit of those yellow light bulbs in the environment are massive. They tend to benefit, first of all, they are less likely to interfere with firefly reproduction Generally speaking, they are less attractive to insects, which means they're less likely to draw mosquitoes and flies and other vectors to doorways and places where people congregate and move in and out of houses. They also are less disruptive of the circadian rhythms in all animals, so that includes people as well as wildlife and birds. Also are less of an interference with the ability to view the stars at night. And so that was kind of an initiative from a group of residents that wanted to work on this. It may or may not be something that could be of interest for one of the town's future, but I wanted to at least make sure that the subcommittee was aware of that effort and that it did receive public fund with the endorsement of the Ag Commission as well as the Conservation Commission. And that might, if people want to learn more about, I could share more about if that's of interest to folks.
And is there a current lighting ordinance for the town?
So the
Do you
town,
know
there are only for site plans. Site plans cover only commercial properties and multi-residence properties. And again, that's from now into the future. So on commercial properties and multi-unit residences does have certain limitations, and it can be at the edges of the property and that it must be shielded. It does not address the color temperature, which is a factor for insects particularly. And it does not address the kind as long as it doesn't spill beyond the property boundaries, which can also be an issue for wildlife. It tends to disrupt, birds' abilities to sleep their sleep cycles, and so that's we have some, but it's incomplete. I guess is the answer, and it doesn't, it doesn't cover the town and our lighting, street lighting. It doesn't, although the town does try to do best practices, and it doesn't cover UNH. And similarly, UNH, they're probably the worst offenders in town by far. It is something that they're aware of, but they have certain budget restraints around addressing, and competitions within the budget. So that's sort of, I guess, the planning side of things.
Thank you. Ann, did you want to say something? I thought I saw your hand up.
No.
Okay. All right. All set. I would like, Linda, I would like to invite you to make a motion to adjourn as our newest member, and you can be a voting member to take Carolyn's place.
Oh.
Please do.
I motion to adjourn today's meeting.
And a second?
I'll second.
Okay. We are adjourned.